This program was brought to you by Coller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.
I'm going to use my talk to do a few things. First and foremost, I feel it is my goal to excite you a little bit more and actually to be a little bit more provocative. So I'm going to use some of the things that were said earlier as a base for asking some hard questions about the new nature of universities in this age. Secondly, I want to bring in a little bit more the issue of venture itself. This is an important point for us. We are a center that deals with venture. We're interested in venture. University is one of our projects. So I want to bring in our agenda into the picture. And also I want to qualify this. This is currently my opinion at this point. It's not the opinion of the Institute. So I'm sharing my own musings on this topic. This is the structure of what I'm going to talk about. Basically bringing you, sort of presenting the question, that's the challenge, giving you a little bit about the context of the venture ecosystem, and then giving you a few highlights about sort of the challenge of universities. Before that, every speaker has a perspective. I want to share with you our perspective. And what do we do at the Coller Institute of Venture? So at the Coller Institute of Venture, we are very fortunate to actually explore one of the most interesting social phenomena, the complex systems in the world. It is the phenomenon of creating up of new companies. Creating up new companies is an unbelievable endeavor. We have few examples here: Home Depot, Starbucks, Staples, eBay. We also have more technology-oriented companies like Microsoft, Intel, Medtronic, Apple, Google, JetBlue, etc. What is interesting about these companies, they were all founded by entrepreneurs. They were funded by venture capital people. They have created a tremendous wealth for the founders and the investors. But most importantly, they have continued to generate wealth for many, many employees and the society they serve. These are the numbers of people working with these companies. The assumption behind this is actually very simple. If we are able to generate more companies, more efficient companies, we enhance the quality of life. Twofold. One, we allow people to work, which is probably the most important thing these days. Secondly, these companies actually generate good and valuable services. Our venture is very special. We're not talking about all the ventures in the world. We are focused on the examples that we had earlier, and we sort of summarize them by talking about new. These are new things, new companies, new ideas. We talk about things that is high potential in terms of societal value and in terms of return for the investors. And we talk about things that are capital-based. Again, the way we look at venture is a combination of two things: financing, which is the money that takes the risk to invest, and the innovation that actually comes up with the idea. And it is this combination that actually creates the value of new companies in the world. We look at this ecosystem, again, a word that was mentioned earlier, and it's interesting because I took the same approach when I started 3 years ago to look at it. I said, what are the components? What are the players in this field? And we've identified 4 different players. On the bottom, the most important people are the entrepreneurs. In a more broader sense, these are the people who generate the ideas, generate the IP, or manage the IP. So it's in general sense where ideas and management come from. On top of them, we have the people who fund them, the people who are courageous enough to put money on new ideas. We call them in a general sense venture capital people. Above them, we talk about institutional investors. This is probably the least known factor for the audience here. But at the end of the day, these are the people that actually set the tone for investment. In fact, less than 5% of the capital of limited partners in the world actually go to venture capital. These are the pension funds, the sovereign funds, wealthy individuals that actually invest in the venture capital people. In fact, limited partners, if we're able to convince them just to invest 1% more, that will be billions and billions of dollars more into innovation and venture in the world. Above them, we have what we call here public authorities, and public authorities are really a generic name for governments, for cities, and the people who actually set the scene and control this ecosystem. This ecosystem, much like what we heard earlier, is being attacked by many forces. It's a system that is changing all the time. In fact, the venture ecosystem is changing a lot, and there are many forces that are affecting this. I'm going to touch upon these a little bit later. By the way, all this is summarized in a research that we did on the first year, where we summarized these changes in a paper, which I will allude to it later. This is the field of research that the Coller Institute is interested in, and we do that by adopting an approach which we summarized in 3 words: global, hub, and impact. First of all, our perspective is global. We are trying to look at this issue from a global perspective because it is a global play. Secondly, we strive not to invent all the information ourselves. In fact, we do that in a very focused area. Mostly, we look outside the world and we identify key new knowledge that is out there, and we sort of turn it into something that is approachable by the consumers of knowledge. Because we strive to create impact. Our biggest challenge, like many scientists, is actually to create impact on the world. We are not happy just to publish the papers. We want to create change in the world, hopefully positive change. We take that in a very technical manner, in sort of an engineering approach. This is a description of our latest sort of mechanism of how we do things. It means that we invest a lot of energy in creating our publications. This is the major result of our work. We already have 3 out there. The first one was dedicated to policy. The second one was dedicated to lessons from the history of venture. And the third one, which is destined to be published next year, deals with a very important topic of deep innovation. Deep innovation, as I said to some of the people earlier, is anything that is not easy. We are looking at how to do innovation, for example, in nanotechnology. Yael, for example, has a nice paper there, or brain sciences. Dana wrote a paper on that. So we are looking at that. You can take a look at these issues later. In fact, what we do today is the base for the main issue of next year in our main research effort, which is basically to summarize and to capture the knowledge, the latest and the greatest, in university venture. So that's going to be the topic of our next publication. This is the major effort to generate the knowledge. We follow that with a major effort to disseminate the knowledge. For example, in conferences, like the ones that you see here, and this is yet one other example to a conference that we do. Some of them are local here in Israel, some of them are outside the world. We, of course, have a very interactive website that we track in a very detailed manner how the knowledge that we create is being used. In fact, we have a backend of Salesforce that actually measures every time somebody logs in what papers they downloaded, and that allows us to capture how our knowledge is being used. Venture is a fascinating topic, but it's a big topic. We cannot just research venture. The way we attack the issue is by defining a particular perspective. The first one was policy. The second one was history of venture. A third one was deep innovation. We are now dealing what we call university venture, which asks the question, what is the relationship between university and the venture world? Which leads me to the topic of our discussion today. And allow me to frame the issue, and from this framing you will see why we designed the day as we designed it. What is the challenge? The challenge is very simple. Each academic institution has 3 goals. Very simple. research, education, and impact. Research is about creating new knowledge. Education is about transferring the knowledge to the next generation. And impact is about using this knowledge for a positive change in society. Each organization has a different distribution of energy on these missions. This is not my research data, but sort of my estimation. I estimate that in Tel Aviv University, we spend 40% of our energy doing new research, 40% of our energy doing education, and maybe 20% thinking about impact. If you are the Weizmann Institute, that ratio is very different. They spend 80% of the time doing research. They don't care so much about education. And frankly, they don't care so much about impact. If you look at a simple college or something that is not a research education center, they do very little research. They spend most of their time in education, and of course their impact is not a target. Every institution needs to decide what is the right ratio for them. It is very difficult to act unless you know what is the ratio that is good for you. The question is therefore, what is the relationship between venture and the university, but more specifically, what is the relationship between venture and the three different goals of the university? And that question does not have one answer. It depends on the institution. The major problem that I see is listed in this slide. Frankly, in many areas of endeavor, if you want to do research, a university is not the place to do it anymore. It is much more efficient, both as a career scientist as well as an industry, to do research somewhere else. The university is not a very efficient place when it comes to research. Education is perhaps an even bigger problem because many universities are not very efficient when it comes to education. The structure, when you sit in a classroom and you have 100 or 200 students, is replaced very easily with other systems that are being done in a much more efficient way. There's no money to do the good education that involves mentorship. So if there's no money, what are we doing it? What is the difference between 200 people in this classroom and a lecture over a video? Many of the lectures in Israel, in the Technion, for example, are done over video. People do not even bother coming to class because, again, the best lecture is already on video. And we're not talking about Coursera or anything sophisticated like that. We're talking pure video. Last but not least is the matter of impact. And I want to be a little bit provocative here. If I'm a taxpayer, shall I use my money, my pure dollars, precious dollars, to give to the university? To do what exactly? To educate people that will then create startups that will then leave the country? Because that's what happens today. You educate innovators, they're very good. Sequoia comes in, pays them $1 million, and that's it. They move to San Francisco. So as a taxpayer, I have a serious question. And again, I'm not talking about the Israeli context. I'm talking, for example, about the Hong Kong context, which I'm very familiar with. And this is exactly the problem they have. There are voices inside the Legislative Council that are asking exactly that question. Why we are spending money on the universities, educating people that are creating companies that are moving out of the country to China. This is a serious question. It's a serious question from both directions, both from the direction of the university and its future, but also from the venture point of view and its future, because venture people are asking themselves exactly the same question. How can we work with the universities? We had a preliminary discussion with Broadcom here that is actually interested and wants to work with the university and are facing some very interesting opportunities and, I would say, challenges. The venture ecosystem itself is being attacked in a major way because it is changing. I'm not going to go over all the details, but just to give you the context If you are a region, say Israel or Hong Kong or Sweden, etc., when you come up with your strategy to develop the ecosystem of your own country, you analyze the external forces, you analyze the internal capabilities. This is a sample from an analysis I did for Hong Kong. And then you have things that you can do. In fact, we documented these in a paper that came out last year, which is called 44 Measures That Government Can Do. Within these 44 measures, 44 tools, actually few of them relate directly to universities and academia. The venture ecosystem that we talked earlier has its own process. This is what is happening in each of the different steps. Again, I'm not going to delve into the details. The purpose here is to tell you how it is changing. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. These are the forces that are changing the system. Force number one, which I would like to talk to you about, is the force that I was, Shmuel, where are you? Very good. Was introduced to by Dr. Shmuel Or, one of the most prolific inventors in Israel. He sits, by the way, near the chief patents officer of Israel, so they can communicate with each other. And Shmuel was courageous enough to introduce me to an interesting endeavor, which is called intellectual ventures. Intellectual ventures, in many ways, is the future university. They don't have any students, and they are not dealing with any impact. They are just dealing with ideas. They generate ideas. It's a factory to generate ideas. They have 4,000 people, inventors. I wouldn't call myself an inventor, but Shmuel is an inventor. I'm a tiny inventor. And they generate a call. Every month, you get a call from them. Here's an interesting problem. What do you think will solve it? Here's another interesting problem. They have crazy problems. A couple of years ago, we got a problem, said hip replacement is going to be a $21 billion market in the US. The current price of a hip is $25,000. Come up with an idea to make it cheaper. Couldn't do anything about that. Then they had another idea. Bamboo trees goes 10 centimeters a week. We think with genetic engineering, it can grow 10 meters a week. Design seeds that build houses. Okay, I didn't know about that too. But then Shmuel and I got a RFI that basically said something like that. You know, many of us have phones, right? All of us have phones. But there are very few applications that actually take the fact that we are all in the same room with phones and create an application out of it. Shmuel calls me up, said, Yesha, that's an interesting question. How about if we drink some coffees and some other liquids to make sure we come up with good ideas? This is actually a true story because we really sat down. Where did we sit? You remember? Top floor of one of the hotels in Israel for a whole day, and we came up with ideas. And then we came up with an interesting idea. The idea goes like this. If you have phones here and something happens outside, and CNN wants to cover that, CNN does not have a news reporter team right here. How about if CNN will call you up and invite you to be a temporary member of a virtual news team? They would call you up and say, do you want to be a virtual news team member? And if you say yes, they will tell you through the GPS where to go, pick up your phone, through the earphones will tell you where to go, and 5 phones will transmit to the headquarters of CNN that story. The result? A virtual news team. Is that a nice idea? It's a great idea. Why it's a great idea? Because 3 weeks later, we got an email from Intellectual Ventures. Thank you very much for your idea. $15,000 were deposited in your account. That's it. It was actually 3 paragraphs that we have sent them out. About a year later, this came out. This is the official patent. Yesha Sivan over there, Shmuel Or over there too, and some of our friends. And this is the patent. By the way, we didn't do that at all. They have outsourcing in India that is doing this. It became a 15-page document, which is an unbelievable description. Shmuel and I did not even recognize that we invented that. Bottom line, it's a remotely controlled crowdsourced media. That's the patent. Now imagine the impact of this on the nature of innovation. From a point of view of an inventor, a scientist, a technologist, an engineer, I don't need to bother with the VCs anymore. I just come up with the ideas and get money from somebody. I don't care about you guys. Anyhow, if I start a company at the end, I'm going to get 2%, right, Sami? So what's the point of working? On the other hand, if I'm a company or if I'm a VC, why do I need innovators? I go to the shelf of intellectual ventures and I pick up whatever is interesting and I create a company based on that idea. This is a complete new way of how innovation is being created. Where are we as a university in this situation? In this new market of ideas? One example. Another very important example is what I call the rise of innovation platforms. And I think we already heard some hints about that. Innovation today is no longer sit in the lab and come up with one thing. It has to do with the ecosystem. And perhaps the most efficient ecosystem today is what we have in the digital side of things. Digital is changing everything because digital is the most mature industry in the world today, much more than any other industry. Because digital has so many subsystems and components that are helping innovation that is no wonder that all the money goes into IT and cyber, etc. Because this is the best chance to succeed. By the way, this slide is the reason why we started Deep Innovation, because the question is how to create these infrastructures in other areas. Digital is completely changing innovation. The innovation of Waze, for example, is a very small innovation, but it sits on top of many, many other innovations. GPS, 4G, the fact that people are willing to give their data, cloud computing, big screens, telephone, smartphone, all this is an infrastructure, and basically Waze just captured the top on top of it. This is changing the way innovation is being done. Now, this is especially critical for universities because the idea that you can come up with a patent and get a percentage of X is ridiculous when you come to information technology. It doesn't happen that way. You start up with an idea and it emerges into something else because you are building, you are just a component, and a company is really building this ecosystem of ideas. I can go on describing the many pressures. Again, the whole thing, for example, of Kickstarter. A very, very interesting example of how innovation is now being funded and solving the number one problem of innovation. You have clients before you have a product. It is no wonder that a company like Oculus Rift got to the value of $2 billion because they were able to compress the value from an idea to a product because they already had the clients before they had the product. This is a big change. In the article, I make a distinction between what I call the current trends, next 3-5 years, and the ongoing trends, which I foresee for the next century. And I foresee the next century as being messy, fast, and global. What do I mean by that? This is the one example that I want to give you about value creation in the world. This is a comparative analysis of how much time it took companies to reach the value of $150 billion in the stock exchange. You see in the top here, Motorola 11 years, and Intel 27 years, and Cisco 9 years, etc., etc. And then you see Google over here, 3 years, and then you see Apple 27 years. But of course you see the blue line. The blue line is Facebook. It took Facebook 1.5 years to reach the value of almost $150 million. This chart is from last year. The value of Facebook today is $300 billion. This is changing the way, again, think of it not from a university point of view, from a finance point of view, from a venture point of view. That is the reason why Facebook was not ashamed to pay $19 billion for WhatsApp. $19 billion for WhatsApp. At the time, it was 10% of the net worth of Facebook. He was eager enough to make sure that he has that because he knew that if something like WhatsApp would go into the market, it would become a much bigger company faster. So he prevented that by simply buying them. What does it mean for universities, all these changes? This is the quote that our president used to show you that Tel Aviv University is in a good place. In fact, I actually looked at that research in a more careful detail. And of course, statistics is a very confusing matter. This actually research does not say anything about anything. Because all of these things are not even comparable with each other. How can you compare Tel Aviv University over here with the likes of Harvard or Stanford? It is simply impossible. In fact, we are much more successful than them in terms of capital. Another data point which I wanted to share with you is what is happening in the UK in the last couple of years. I think the UK is the most advanced place in terms of policy of managing innovation from universities today. They have very interesting ways, very unique ways, different ways to capitalize on the knowledge that is being created by the universities. The UK has very good universities, but historically they were not able to actually capitalize on that compared with the US. About 10 years ago, they decided to deal with that more carefully, and they came up with very interesting models. Two models that are quite interesting is the models of the group over there, which is a public company that has the right to basically commercialize knowledge from some of the universities. And then another interesting, in another place out of Cambridge, a small university outside of London, of course, is the tremendous value they give faculty members if they are successful to actually come up with innovation. It's becoming a big deal. Another data point has to do with patents. As we have seen earlier, patents themselves are completely changing. In fact, let me say it bluntly, TTOs, especially in Israel, but also in other places, are a little bit fascinated with patents. And that whole system of patents is not very effective in modern innovation. We really have to pay attention to that. 1 minute, very good. I have 5 more points and 2 more, so exactly like my president. Data point number 4 is why exactly we are doing what we are doing. What is the purpose? Is our purpose to create new knowledge? Is our purpose to create new jobs? From a taxpayer point of view, that's my purpose, because I'm not interested in pure knowledge. Is it money? Or maybe it's to fix the world. Each goal has a different plan, and even a combination of goals has a different plan. Last but not least is the rise of the academic entrepreneur. There are some interesting writings today about a new kind of academician, ones that put the impact first and new knowledge later. This is an important point, but do we build our system in such a way that facilitate that? Here are my 5 very, I would say, initial insights. And let me say one more thing about insights. My goal today, our goal today, is to generate these insights. My goal is to get 100 insights like that, from which we will choose 10 to develop into a more detailed analysis. Number 1, we have to invest more energy to think about this issue, because it's clear to me that what we have now is not working. Number two is we have to consider the impact and the right mix of venture when it comes to research, education, and impact. It depends on different percentages that we allocate, but it is clear, and from my discussions with our president, I know it's top on his agenda, to see how venture affects these three missions. Of course, and we had the director talking about that directly, we have to consider the context. Israel is different than the US, different than Germany, different than China. What is important and what is clear to me, mostly from the work that I've done in China, is that whatever we decide, we have to be very clear about it and we have to be gamble. We have to gamble on particular things. We cannot do everything. If we try to do everything, we do nothing. We have to make that decision. If we're able to decide on X, Y, and Z, few key points, then there's a chance that we will actually create impact. And last but not least, venture has to be an integral part of the strategy of a university. One strategy could say we completely ignore that and we continue to do X, Y, and Z, and that's fine. But lack of clarity when it comes to venture is actually causing confusion and wasted resources. I hope I've been provocative enough. I would like to thank you for your attention and wish us all a very productive day.
This program was brought to you by Coller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.